I never thought I would see the day when a cowboy would save an Apache warrior, but there I was, holding on to life by a thread, hoping that someone, anyone, would find me. Tawny Moon, the Apache warrior, had fought her whole life for the survival of her people, but now, in the desert heat, she was broken. The ground beneath her felt like the last thing she would ever touch. Her legs were gone, severed by the cruel hands of fate and war. Blood seeped into the dry earth as she lay there, struggling to breathe, barely conscious. The battle had ended for her, and now, all that remained was the slow march toward death. Alone, abandoned. Her tribe had moved on, leaving her behind as they sought safety. They thought her dead, but she was very much alive, alive in a way that felt worse than death itself. The world was closing in around her, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tawny's thoughts drifted. Was she strong enough to keep fighting? Or had the time come to surrender? In the distance, a figure appeared, moving through the haze of heat and dust. Tawny could barely lift her head, but she could see the silhouette of a man on horseback. He was coming closer. Tawny's heart beat faster, hope flickering inside her like the last embers of a dying fire. Could it be? Could this man, this stranger, offer her the salvation she so desperately needed? She wasn't sure if he was friend or foe, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but reach for him. Jack Dawson, the cowboy, had seen many things in his life. He had known pain, loss, and the harsh realities of life on the frontier. But nothing could prepare him for what he found that day. A woman, an Apache, lying in the dirt, her body broken, her spirit still fighting. He had been riding through the desert, his thoughts clouded by the weight of his own solitude, when he stumbled upon her. He hadn't meant to find anyone, let alone someone who had been left to die. But here she was, barely clinging to life. Jack dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a quiet thud. He approached cautiously, not knowing what to expect. Was she a threat? A warrior of the Apache tribe? Or was she simply another victim of the unforgiving world they all lived in? He knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he checked her pulse. It was faint, but there. She was alive, against all odds. His mind raced. He couldn't leave her like this. Not when she still had a chance. Jack didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the sight of her broken form, the helplessness in her eyes, or maybe it was the quiet voice in his heart telling him to help. Whatever the reason, he made a decision in that moment, a decision that would change both their lives forever. He lifted her carefully, gently, as if she were the most fragile thing in the world. He carried her back to his cabin, his heart heavy with the knowledge that what he was doing could put him in danger. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't alone anymore. Tawny Moon, the warrior, had found a new chance at life, and Jack Dawson, the cowboy, had found someone worth fighting for. Jack Dawson sat beside the fire, his gaze fixed on the crackling flames. Tawny Moon, the Apache warrior, had been asleep for hours now. Her body, once strong and fierce, was now broken and fragile, but there was something about her that kept him from looking away. She was a stranger, a woman from a world so different from his own, yet there was a quiet strength in her that he admired. He had spent his days working the ranch alone, far from the chaos of the world, but now, with Tawny in his home, everything felt different. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken questions, yet neither of them knew how to bridge that gap. Jack had heard the stories of the Apache, of their strength, their bravery, and their ruthless defense of their land. Tawny had to be one of them, but she was no enemy. She was simply a woman, wounded and in need of help. The fire crackled again, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He looked at her, the dim light dancing on her features. Her long dark hair was matted with dirt, and her clothes were torn, but she was alive. That was all that mattered now. Tawny stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. At first, she didn't recognize where she was. The last thing she remembered was the pain, the desert, and then nothing. But now, she was lying on a rough cot, warmth surrounding her. The scent of smoke and earth filled the air, and she could hear the crackle of a fire nearby. Slowly, she pushed herself up, wincing at the pain in her limbs. She could feel the absence of her legs, and for a moment, the weight of it all almost overwhelmed her. But then, she remembered. The cowboy, the one who had found her in the desert. She turned her head, her sharp eyes searching the room. Jack was sitting by the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. Tawny's heart skipped a beat. She had been saved by a stranger, a man from a world she had been taught to fear. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been abandoned by her people, but now, it was a cowboy who had shown her mercy. She had no reason to trust him, no reason to believe that he had saved her out of anything but curiosity or duty. Yet, something in her gut told her he wasn't like the others. Jack had heard her stir and turned his gaze toward her. For a moment, their eyes locked. Tawny's expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of something else, something Jack couldn't quite place. Fear? Gratitude? Perhaps both. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her consciousness. Tawny swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. Why? The word was simple, but it held so much weight. Why had he saved her? Why had he brought her here, to his home, when all she had ever known was survival in the harshest conditions? Jack hesitated, his hand running through his unkempt hair as he stared into the fire. Because you needed help, he said simply. Tawny frowned, the answer not satisfying her, but there was nothing more to say. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Tawny was left with more questions than answers, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had been saved, not by her people, but by a man she didn't know. A man who saw something in her that no one else had. The night stretched on, and the world outside seemed so far away. Tawny lay back, down, her body exhausted from the pain and the confusion. Jack sat by the fire, his mind racing, knowing that his decision to help her could lead to more trouble than he was prepared for. But in that moment, none of that mattered. He had made a choice, and the consequences of that choice would come in time. The days passed slowly at Jack Dawson's cabin. Tawny Moon, though her legs were lost, began to regain some strength. Jack had built a small ramp to help her move around, though the scars of her injury were still fresh in her mind. The mornings were quiet, filled only with the sounds of the wind brushing against the walls and the crackling of the fire. Tawny spent her time resting, but her thoughts were never at ease. She knew she could not stay here forever, hidden away in this man's cabin. Her people, her tribe, were out there, and they needed her. But every time she tried to move, a sharp pain reminded her of the harsh reality she faced. Jack never pushed her to do more than she could. He simply watched over her, as if he too was unsure what to do next. Tawny didn't know how to feel about him. She had been taught to mistrust the white man, to fear him and his ways. Yet Jack had shown her kindness when no one else had. He had carried her to safety, fed her, and given her a place to heal. Why? What did he want in return? But as the days went by, she couldn't ignore the feeling that Jack was different. He wasn't like the others. He didn't speak of taking land or hunting her people. He spoke little of his past, but when he did, it was with a quiet pain that mirrored her own. She could sense it in his voice when he spoke of his family, of the way he had chosen this solitary life in the wilderness. She understood that kind of pain. Perhaps it was why she felt some semblance of trust growing inside her, despite her better judgment. One morning, as the sun rose over the mountains, Tawny sat by the window, watching the light paint the landscape in soft shades of gold. The wind was light, carrying the scent of the forest and the earth. Jack was out gathering firewood, and Tawny was alone in the cabin. She let her thoughts wander, drifting to her home, her people. She wondered what had become of them. Had they left her behind? Would they have thought her dead, as she had thought of so many others who had fallen in battle? There was no way to know. Her mind returned to Jack, and she frowned. He was so different from the warriors she had known. His strength wasn't physical. It was in his quiet determination, in his willingness to care for her, a stranger. Tawny hadn't asked him to save her, but he had done so without hesitation. The questions inside her stirred once again. Why had he done it? As if summoned by her thoughts, Jack returned to the cabin, his arms full of firewood. He glanced at her, and their eyes met for a moment. It was strange, the way their gazes locked. Tawny felt a sudden warmth in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning nearby. Jack put the wood down and wiped his brow. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his voice steady, though there was a hint of concern behind his words. Tawny nodded slowly. "Better," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I should leave soon." Jack's face darkened, but he said nothing. He simply walked to the small table and set about preparing the morning meal. Tawny watched him for a moment, before turning her gaze back to the window. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees outside. Jack didn't try to stop her from leaving. He didn't try to convince her to stay. He simply continued with his tasks, his movements purposeful. But Tawny couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this silence, was the beginning of something bigger. Something that would change both their lives forever. She wasn't sure what it would be, but she knew she couldn't stay in his cabin forever. She had to face her people again, even if it meant going back to the dangers of the world she had left behind. But for now, there was only the stillness of the cabin, the crackling of the fire, and the uncertainty that lay ahead. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls, casting long, thin shadows across the room. Tawny Moon sat by the window again, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The land stretched out before her, wide and wild, just as it always had been, but now it felt different. It no longer felt like a place she belonged. Not after everything that had happened. She turned her head, watching Jack Dawson as he moved around the cabin. He was steady, reliable, like the land itself. He had been her lifeline in the last few weeks, taking care of her, offering her a place to heal. Yet, with every passing day, she could feel the pull of her tribe, the pull of her past. Her heart ached as she thought about them. They had been her family, her people. But what if they no longer saw her as one of them? What if they had abandoned her? Jack paused for a moment, noticing her eyes fixed on the distance. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. Tawny looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I can't stay here forever," she replied. The words were heavy, but they were true. She had a duty, a responsibility. Her people needed her. Jack didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and went back to his work. It wasn't a surprise to him that she would feel the need to return. He had always known this moment would come. The silence between them grew thick as Tawny continued to watch the horizon, feeling torn between the life she had known and the one she was building here with Jack. The weight of her past seemed so far away now, yet still, it clung to her, a shadow she couldn't escape. As the days stretched on, Jack began to notice the small changes in her. She moved with more ease, her strength returning slowly, though not completely. The pain in her legs had dulled, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. He could see it in her eyes, the restlessness, the longing for something beyond the walls of this cabin. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jack finally spoke the words that had been lingering between them. "You don't have to go back," he said. Tawny looked at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, I can't tell you what to do, but you've been through enough. You don't have to return to a world that's done you wrong." Tawny shook her head. "I don't have a choice, Jack. My people, they need me." Jack didn't argue. He simply reached for the firewood, stoking the flames in silence. Tawny didn't know what else to say. She understood his words, but they didn't change the truth. She couldn't run from her past forever. The morning light the next day was harsher than before, like the world was waking up to a new reality. Tawny stood at the door of the cabin, her pack slung over her shoulder. She looked back at Jack, who stood at the window, watching her. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that moment, Tawny saw the truth in his eyes. He cared for her, maybe more than he wanted to admit. But he also knew this was something she had to do. Tawny took a deep breath, stepping outside into the cool morning air. She felt the wind whip through her hair, a reminder of the world outside. Jack followed her, but he didn't speak. He only watched as she took the first steps toward the life she had left behind. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew she had to try. The world was waiting, and she could no longer hide from it. Tawny walked through the tall grass, her legs still stiff from the injury, but each step felt more natural than the last. The cabin was far behind her now, and Jack was nothing more than a figure in the distance, a silhouette against the setting sun. She had told him she had to go, and he had said nothing to stop her, only watched as she walked away, his face unreadable. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. She had spent days healing in his cabin, days that had offered her a brief glimpse of peace, but the world she had once known was calling her back. She could not escape it. Her people needed her. Her tribe was still out there, and she couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The wind rustled through the trees as Tawny moved, her mind racing with thoughts of what awaited her. She had no idea if her people would still accept her. They had left her behind once, thinking she was dead, and she didn't know how they would react when they saw her again, especially now that she was no longer the warrior she had once been. She had lost much more than just her legs in the battle. Tawny had lost her place among them, her sense of belonging. What was she now? A woman broken and dependent on a stranger's mercy? She shook her head, trying to rid herself of the doubts that clouded her mind. The land around her felt different now. It was no longer a place of comfort, but a reminder of everything she had lost. The sky above was growing darker as night approached, and Tawny knew she needed to find shelter soon. She couldn't risk traveling further in the dark. As she moved, a thought crossed her mind. She had left Jack behind without a second thought. There had been no real goodbye, no words of thanks for everything he had done for her. He had given her a chance to heal, to regain some of what she had lost, and she had walked away without a backward glance. The guilt gnawed at her, but she told herself it was necessary. She had to do this for herself, for her people. The next morning, Tawny found herself standing at the edge of the valley where her tribe had once camped. She recognized the place, even though everything looked different now. The earth was scarred from years of drought, the once lush grass now replaced by dry, cracked soil. The smoke from the village fire no longer rose into the air. It was quiet, too quiet. Tawny's heart began to race. She could feel the weight of the silence, the emptiness that surrounded her. What had happened to them? Had they moved on? Or worse, had they abandoned this land entirely? Her stomach churned as she stepped forward, determined to find the answers she sought. She needed to know if they would still accept her, if she still had a place among them. But as Tawny walked deeper into the valley, the silence was broken by the sound of voices. Low at first, then louder, coming from a cluster of figures ahead. Her breath caught in her throat. She recognized them instantly. Apache warriors. They were gathering around a fire, their faces painted with the traditional war paint that marked them as leaders of the tribe. Tawny's heart pounded in her chest as she approached, her steps faltering. Would they see her as the same warrior they had left behind? Or would they see her as a liability, someone unfit to lead? The figures around the fire turned as she approached, their eyes sharp, studying her. Tawny's breath caught in her throat. She had not expected such a cold reception. Tawny Moon. One of them spoke, his voice gruff and hard. You live? Tawny nodded slowly, her voice thick with emotion. I live. The silence that followed was unbearable. She had expected many things, but not this uncertainty, this distance. These were the faces of her family, her people, but in their eyes, she saw nothing but judgment. The warrior who had spoken took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. You have returned to us, but you are not the same, he said. Tawny swallowed hard, trying to push down the lump in her throat. I know, but I am still Apache. The words felt hollow in her mouth, but they were all she could offer. She was still one of them, wasn't she? Her body might be broken, but her spirit was intact. The warrior regarded her for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps. But your journey is not over, Tawny Moon. It has only just begun. Tawny didn't know what to expect from this moment. But one thing was clear, her path forward would be harder than she had imagined. The warriors who had once fought beside her were now strangers, and her place among them had to be earned anew. But Tawny would fight. She would always fight. Tawny stood at the edge of the camp, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The warriors around the fire continued their quiet discussions, their faces serious and unreadable. She had returned to her people, but the reception she had received was not what she had expected. She thought she would be embraced, that they would welcome her back as one of their own. Instead, there was only distance and coldness. The warrior who had spoken to her earlier, the one who had seemed to hold some authority, now approached her again. His gaze was intense, but not unkind. You have returned, he said, his voice low. But you are broken. Tawny met his gaze steadily. She had heard those words before, spoken by those who did not understand the weight of her loss. She had lost her legs. But she had not lost herself. I am still Apache, she replied, her voice steady, though her heart ached with the truth of it. The warrior nodded slowly. You are Apache, he said, but it will take more than blood to prove that you are one of us again. Tawny swallowed hard, the words stinging more than she had anticipated. She had fought for her people, bled for them, and yet, now she was seen as less than she had once been. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their expectations. But she was not going to let their coldness define her. She had always fought for what she believed in, and now was no different. "What must I do?" Tawny asked, her voice resolute. The warrior's eyes flickered with something, perhaps respect, perhaps something else, but he said nothing for a moment. Finally, he spoke. "Prove to us that you are still strong. Prove that you can lead." Tawny felt a surge of determination rise within her. She had always been a warrior, and even without her legs, she still had the strength inside her to fight for what was right. She didn't need their approval to know who she was. But if she was going to earn their trust, she would have to show them that she could still stand, that she could still lead them. "I will prove it," Tawny said firmly. The warrior nodded once more, and without another word, he turned and walked back to the group. Tawny stood there, watching him, her mind racing with the possibilities. She wasn't sure how she would prove herself, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let her people down. As the days passed, Tawny found herself becoming more and more determined to show her strength. She spent her time learning to adapt to her new life, practicing movements that would allow her to lead her people again. She relied on her sharp instincts, her ability to think quickly, and her knowledge of the land. The tribe watched her closely, their eyes following her every move. Tawny could feel the weight of their gaze, but she didn't let it stop her. She worked harder, pushing herself beyond what she thought was possible. She wasn't going to let her injury define her. One afternoon, as Tawny was practicing with her bow, the warrior who had spoken to her approached again. This time, his expression was different. There was no judgment in his eyes, only something more like understanding. "You are trying," he said, his voice softer now. "But you must understand, it is not enough to prove your strength. You must prove your heart." Tawny paused, the bowstring still in her hand. She looked at him, confusion clouding her thoughts. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Strength is not just in the body," he replied. "It is in the spirit, in the heart. You have been through much, Tawny Moon, but now you must show us that you have the heart of a leader." Tawny thought about his words long after he had left. She had always relied on her strength, on her ability to fight, but perhaps he was right. Perhaps there was more to being a leader than just physical strength. Perhaps it was time to show her people the strength of her heart. She spent the next few days reflecting on her past, on the choices she had made, and on what it meant to be Apache. She had always fought for her people, but she realized now that true leadership was about more than just fighting. It was about protecting, about guiding, and about showing compassion. As she made her way back to the fire that evening, Tawny felt a sense of clarity settle within her. She had spent so much of her life fighting, but now, it was time to lead. She was ready to prove to her people that even though she was broken, she could still lead them with strength, with heart, and with unwavering determination. Tawny sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames licking at the cool night air. The tribe had gathered around her, the crackling of the fire and the soft murmurs of the elders filling the quiet night. She could feel their eyes on her, but this time, it was different. She no longer felt like an outsider, an abandoned warrior. There was something new in their gaze now, something that resembled respect. She had spent the last few days proving herself, not just through actions, but through the quiet strength that came from within. She had learned that leadership was not about fighting the hardest battles, but about leading with wisdom, compassion, and heart. And she had done just that. Tawny had worked alongside the warriors, helping them in ways she could still manage, teaching them what she knew about the land, about survival, and about the strength of unity. Every day had been a test, but each test had only strengthened her resolve. As the days passed, she felt herself becoming part of the tribe again, not just a warrior, but a leader among them. The moment of truth had come when she stood before the council of elders. They were gathered in the center of the camp, the firelight casting long shadows on their weathered faces. Tawny stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her head held high. The chief elder, a man who had once viewed her as little more than a broken warrior, now regarded her with a different expression. "Tawny Moon," he said, his voice steady. "You have proven that you are still one of us. Your strength, your heart, and your wisdom have earned you the respect of this tribe." Tawny's heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She had earned her place back among them. The chief elder paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "But there is still more to be done," he said, his voice low. "We face challenges that will test us all. Our people are scattered. Our land is under threat. We need leaders who can unite us, who can guide us through the coming storms. Tawny nodded, her voice firm as she spoke. I am ready. Whatever is to come, I will lead. I will fight for my people, for our future. The chief elder's expression softened, a slight smile tugging at his lips. Then it is settled. You will lead us, Tawny Moon. You are the heart of this tribe. Tawny felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had found her place again, but this time, it was not as a warrior alone. She was a leader, someone who could guide her people through the darkness. The elders spoke of the challenges ahead, of the work that needed to be done to rebuild their land and their way of life. Tawny listened intently, her mind already working on strategies, on ways to bring the tribe together. She knew it would not be easy. There would be battles, both external and within, but she was ready. The fire before them burned brightly, its flames dancing in the night air. Tawny stood, tall, her heart steady. She was not the same as she had been when she had first returned. She had found her strength, her purpose, and now, she was ready to lead. The tribe was no longer divided. They were united under her leadership, and together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. Tawny felt the weight of her responsibility, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She was where she was meant to be, with the people she was meant to lead. Tawny stood at the edge of the camp, watching the horizon where the sun began to dip behind the distant mountains. Her tribe was working, preparing for the long journey ahead. They were stronger now, more united than they had been in years. Tawny had led them through the first phase of rebuilding, helping them reclaim their strength. The warriors had come together, the families had united, and now they were ready to move forward. It was a difficult journey, but Tawny had shown them that even in the face of adversity, there was hope. As she looked out over the land, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known before. She was home again. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine and earth, a reminder of the wilderness that had always been a part of her. The land was still wild, still untamed, but it was also full of life. Tawny knew that the challenges were far from over, but she had confidence now, confidence in her people and in herself. She had earned the respect of the elders, the warriors, and the families. She had proved that her strength wasn't just in her body, but in her heart. As the days went by, Tawny continued to lead her people with wisdom and care. She worked closely with the warriors, ensuring they were prepared for whatever came next. She also spent time with the children, teaching them about their history, their culture, and the ways of their people. Tawny was determined to make sure that the next generation would carry on the legacy of the Apache. She was no longer just a warrior. She was a protector, a teacher, and a leader. One evening, as the sun set and the camp began to settle into the quiet of the night, Tawny sat by the fire, her thoughts drifting. She had found peace, but she knew there was still work to be done. There was always more to do. But she also knew that she was no longer alone in this fight. She had the strength of her people behind her, and together, they could face anything. Jack Dawson had come to her mind more than once in recent days. She had left him behind, not knowing when or if she would ever see him again. But she couldn't deny the feeling that he had played a part in her healing, in her journey. Tawny had never expected to find kindness in a cowboy, but Jack had given her something she hadn't realized she needed: hope. She didn't know where he was now, or if their paths would cross again. But the thought of him made her smile. It was strange, how a brief encounter with a stranger could change everything. Tawny closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the fire on her face. The sound of the wind in the trees was soothing, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. She was ready for whatever lay ahead. She was not just a survivor, but a leader, and she would fight for her people, for their future, with all the strength she had left. Tawny stood at the edge of the camp, the morning sun rising over the distant mountains. The air was still, the valley quiet except for the soft rustle of the trees. The tribe had come a long way since she had returned to them, and the days ahead promised more challenges, but also more hope. Tawny had led them through the hardest parts of their journey, but now, as the weight of her responsibility settled deeper into her chest, she realized that this was just the beginning. The work wasn't over. She had earned her place among them, but the real test was yet to come. She had proven herself to the warriors, the elders, and the families, but Tawny knew that leadership didn't end with respect. It was about making difficult choices, guiding her people through adversity. It was about strength, not just in battle, but in every decision, every step forward. She could feel the eyes of her people on her, watching her, waiting for her next move. Tawny had no illusions about the path she was on. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The land was still hard, still unforgiving, and the threats against her tribe were far from gone. But Tawny wasn't afraid. She had faced death and come out the other side. She had faced her own doubts and emerged stronger. And now, with her people behind her, she felt a quiet confidence that came from within. She had found her place in the world again. As she walked through the camp, Tawny could see the changes she had brought to the tribe. The warriors were stronger, more unified. The families worked together, not just to survive, but to thrive. The children had started to learn their history, their culture, and Tawny made sure that they understood the value of unity, of strength, and of heart. She had spent so much of her life fighting, but now she saw that leading was about more than just strength in battle. It was about guiding, protecting, and ensuring that her people would endure, not just for a day, but for generations to come. Tawny paused at the edge of the fire, watching as the flames flickered in the early morning light. The heat from the fire warmed her face, and she felt a sense of peace that she had not known in a long time. She had come so far, and yet, the journey still felt as though it was just beginning. Her thoughts drifted to Jack Dawson, the cowboy who had saved her when she had nothing left. She thought of the kindness he had shown her, the way he had taken her in without question, without hesitation. She didn't know if their paths would ever cross again, but she knew that Jack had played a part in her healing. His presence had been a reminder that sometimes, help came from the most unexpected places. Tawny smiled softly at the memory. It felt good to know that someone cared, even if it was only for a brief moment in time. She turned away from the fire, walking towards the center of the camp where the warriors had gathered. They were preparing for the next phase of their journey, and Tawny's heart swelled with pride as she looked at them. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. Tawny had done what she set out to do. She had returned to her people, proven her worth, and helped them rebuild. But now, the time had come to look forward, to prepare for the future. She would lead them, not just through the trials of today, but through the challenges of tomorrow. And no matter what lay ahead, Tawny knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, and she would do whatever it took to protect her people, to guide them to a better future.